Okay, it looks like we are. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to our third day of NASIG 2021. And I am so pleased to introduce our vision speaker, Fobazi Itar. And let me go ahead and get doing that now. Fobazi Itar's research is concerned with the relationships and tensions between the espoused values of librarianship and the realities present in the experiences of marginalized librarians and library users. In 2018, she coined the term and defined the concept of vocational awe, which describe the set of ideas, values, and assumptions librarians have about themselves and the profession that result in beliefs that libraries as institutions are inherently good and sacred and therefore beyond critique. In her article, Vocational Awe, The Lies We Tell Ourselves, she describes how vocational awe can lead to burnout and a sense that one's own self-care is less important than the work being done. Although written before the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, Itar's words have resonated with many library workers through the nation in the current moment, as we strive to serve our patrons and our profession as best we can amidst the competing demands of home, work, and health. Her remarks on equity and inclusion in libraries are just as timely and important. In a 2019 interview with Kathy Hannebach, she spoke of the resistance that marginalized library workers can face when advocating for better working conditions, and talked about what a changing world might offer in the way of alliances and social progress. When describing what a better world would look like to her, Fobazi Itar said, in part, a place where change is embraced, where people work as a collective rather than working in opposition to each other and to one's own interest, a place where conflict isn't seen as a four-letter word, but as a fulcrum to a better time, a better organization, and a healthier world and place. Fobazi Itar's critical work on libraries, labor, and identity has been published in the Library with the Lead Pipe and edited collections, including the Critical Library Pedagogy Handbook and Knowledge Justice, Disrupting Library and Information Studies Through Critical Race Theory. She has given invited talks at numerous professional and scholarly conferences and events, including the Library as Place Symposium, and keynotes at the Association of College and Research Libraries and Library Journals Directors Summit, and now NASIG. Her research has been covered in numerous outlets, and she consults in library and corporate contexts on labor, identity, and diversity. She is also the creator of the open access video game, Killing Me Softly, a game about microaggressions. Welcome, Fobazi.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. Um, I am still feeling a little under the weather. For those who don't know, I was discharged from the hospital just yesterday, um, and but I wanted to be here, and I felt able that I would be able to do it just in a reduced way. And so I just wanted to, have that context going forward because I think it's always important for everyone to remember that while libraries are important, we are also important as people. Um, so if you just give me 1 second, I will pull up my presentation. Thank you so much. I'm having a little bit of technical difficulty, so just give me 1 minute. Thank you. So I've just put it into full screen mode, and seeing as everyone can see the screen, I will get started. Thank you so much again for having me here. So, as the lovely introduction said, my name is Fobazi Itar. Here are some of the places that you can find me. I am always on Twitter. So that's probably the best place to reach me, quite honestly. Um, as for my sort of longer form work, you can find that on my blog and website, fobazietar.com. And finally, If there are questions, comments that we don't get to, or if you would just like to reach out afterward, please feel free to email me. It may take some time for me to get back to you just because I'm coming back to 2 weeks worth of emails, but I will do my best to get back to you. And honestly, there's no question too small or too silly. Okay, so before we begin, I just have, these two sort of ground rules basically. So, vocational awe underpins the whole narrative of librarianship. While the stories we tell about ourselves can define us, they can also confine us. And until we understand where we are as libraries now, we can't really understand where we could go in the future. And as we start to talk about these things, it can make people uncomfortable, which is a totally normal reaction. The work of identification and deconstruction often makes people uncomfortable because it challenges our assumptions and exposes the blind spots that confine us. Sometimes it can even trigger defensiveness. I just ask that you embrace that discomfort, sit with it, learn through it. Only by seeing clearly can we begin the important work of moving towards the future. Which leads me to my next and last point. Feel those feelings, they're totally valid. But I would ask that you not let it stop there. Push through it and think about how you can start to make changes in yourself, in your workplace, in your organization. They don't have to be big changes. In fact, the small changes are sometimes the most impactful. But action is what will move things forward, not feelings. And so let's start with the story of libraries as they are now and pre pandemic. So here are some quotes showing what those outside of librarianship say when they speak about libraries. As we they have a very high opinion of them. Libraries are cornerstones of democracy, a temple of learning, and its existence defines our past and our future. And this is how libraries and librarians describe themselves. And finally, these are our library heroes. We have Margaret Edwards, an educator and pioneer in young adult librarianship and literacy. All of these people either have awards named after them or are seen as very important historical and contemporary touchstones of library history. So, as I said, Margaret Edwards, known for the Young Adult Award, was a pioneer in young adult librarianship and literacy. She brought books to the masses, in her own bookmobile, and literally driving a horse drawn cart books through various neighborhoods of Baltimore, going door to door, making sure that underprivileged and underrepresented communities were able to see themselves in books. Pura Belpre was a librarian in her community that pioneered Spanish language materials. She instituted bilingual story hours, bought Spanish language books, and implemented programs based on traditional holidays like the celebration of Three Kings Day. In addition to that, she attended meetings of civic organizations such as the Puerto Rican Brotherhood of America and the La Lingua Puerto Rica y Hispania. Next, we have Barbara Giddings, who's known for her advocacy for the improvement of materials for gays and lesbians in libraries. Not only did she help with the recategorizations of LGBT books in libraries, but was a major force in ALA, as well as the founder of the very first lesbian organization in the US, chair of the ALA, Social Responsibility Roundtable. She created the Gay Task Force, which later evolved into ALA's GLBT Roundtable in 2000. One of the Stonewall Awards is named after her. Moving on to the Connecticut Four. Under the broad powers of the Patriot Act, the FBI demanded that these four librarians produce private information about patrons' reading habits. Then they used a gag order to force them to remain silent about said request for the rest of their lives under penalty of prison time. The four librarians weren't even allowed to communicate with each other by phone or email or tell their own families. But instead of conforming to the rules set by the Patriot Act and by the FBI, they fought the case for years and years and years until just recently they were able to share their story. And perhaps most recently, the most therefore contemporary library hero, Shara Kowalski, became known for administering the anti-overdose drug Naxalone, more commonly known as Narcan, to patrons in and around McPherson Square Branch in Philadelphia. The article first describing the story went viral and was shared at least 20,000 times. So all of these people show sort of what we as librarians and as library workers aspire to. People who go above and beyond to serve the mission of the libraries, to, as our quotes say, right, to either increase democracy, show that everyone's opinions have value, bring community healing, show that libraries are for everyone. These heroes, in turn, demonstrate the story that libraries tell about themselves, the ideals, as it were. And so, what all of these have in common is this idea that we're doing what we love. And because of that, we're going above and beyond for it. Now, most of us have seen this quote in either in this way or in any of its many variations. The sentiment basically boils down to the idea that love and passion can make anything, even work, feel like play. And because of this love and passion, these ideal workers become successful precisely because they love what they do. To them, their job duties are in fact the most pleasurable and perfect way to spend the hours between 9 and 5 or whatever their schedule may be. Mia Tokumitsu has written a lot about the Do What You Love framework, and I would encourage checking out her work. And of course, while it's not a problem to love your job, it is a problem if that becomes the very foundation of a field. The way it seems like, looking at our library heroes and the ways that outsiders and insiders describe librarianship, the way it seems to have here. And we see that it affects not just our library heroes, but the sort of day-to-day workers as well. These are some quotes of librarians talking about their relationships to libraries as librarians. They were either publicly available or I got permission to post. And so, as we can see, librarians really, really love their job. It's a calling, it's a vocation, it's a magical place full of wonder. And in fact, when library work can be such thankless work, patrons who can sometimes be rude, angry, and or offensive, that prioritization of the narrative that we do good work and that libraries are great places, magical places, can be comforting. And so this leads us all to vocational awe. Is librarianship a vocation or an occupation? While technically these two words, occupation and vocation, are synonyms, there are very different connotations for the two. An occupation is the work in which a person is employed. A vocation is a summons or strong inclination to a particular course or state of action, especially a divine call to the religious life. In many of its earliest uses, a vocation referred to the way one lives in response to God's call. So while you can leave an occupation at home, a vocation is forever. I'm a pastor's kid. There's usually at least one PK in the audience. So hello, shout out to you. And so as we PKs know, we pastors' kids, while you might leave church, church never really leaves you. There's Bible studies, religious retreats, even vacation Bible school during the summers. And so I ask again, is librarianship an occupation or a vocation? I think as we've seen throughout this presentation already, it is very much seen as a vocation. And so vocational awe describes the set of ideas, values, and assumptions librarians have about themselves and the profession that result in notions that libraries as institutions are inherently good and sacred and therefore beyond critique. So, to break this down some more, libraries are seen as inherently good. I mean, they provide access to all, have diverse collections, they champion truth and free speech, unless, of course, those people are undesirable. When we talk about libraries and access to all, we very often forget to mention the history of segregation in libraries, a famous case being the Tougaloo Nine. During segregation, 9 students at Tougaloo College went to the white and main library on campus to study and get books that their Negro college library did not have. They were subsequently arrested for using the library and brought to jail. In many cases, libraries closed rather than integrate. Or what they would do to discourage socializing and mixing of groups would be they would take away all the tables and chairs in the room, in a specific room made for integrating, whereas the rest of the library would be remain segregated, to prevent the idea that mixing would be a good thing. And even if we are thinking in a more current context, policies such as allowing TERFs and Nazis to have meetings in the library show that we aren't, in fact, open to all. Policies that discriminate against the unhoused by requiring IDs, or if it's on college campuses, requiring college IDs for specific hours of the day, show that we still aren't really providing access to all. Libraries may be seen as inherently sacred. They inspire awe, they're safe spaces, they're holy, otherworldly, a sanctuary. Again, only for those who are privileged, for those we deem worthy. Whether it is, again, by allowing Nazis, TERFs, and other bigots into our supposedly safe space, or whether it is by having policies that are inequitably policed, or whether it's by having actual police in the libraries. Libraries often show that they aren't, in fact, safe spaces for everyone, because there is no such place as a safe space for Nazis that are in fact safe spaces for everyone. The inherent bigotry involved in Nazism, in TERFdom, show that the personhood of other people don't matter, aren't there. And therefore, the only people who can be safe in spaces with Nazis and TERFs and other bigots are those who either believe in the same ideology or are privileged enough to not trip any wires that would suggest otherness to these bigots. And finally, libraries are seen as the last bastions of democracy, the soul of the community, and therefore beyond critique. But libraries still to this day uphold white supremacy and ignore valid critiques around labor and other things that hurt our communities, hurt our workers. And if it's beyond critique simply because it's a stand in for democracy, then refusing to address its very real problems will chip away at democracy itself. For instance, we've talked about how libraries have upheld white supremacy and left out marginalized groups. But even, as I said, valid critiques about labor practices and the increased demands on the librarians themselves cannot be addressed if the goodness of the library is used to render these concerns invisible. In a true democracy, no institution is beyond reproach. And so, how does vocational awe get weaponized in the workplace? Well, libraries work on a Taylorism model, except instead of efficiency, passion is the metric on which workers are evaluated. It starts off with an energetic and passionate worker who is hired into the organization. And then the passionate worker is used and abused through various types of abuse and low morale experiences until they inevitably burn out and leave the organization. And then what happens is either another passionate worker is hired to fill their place, or the space is left empty and more abuse is doled out to the remaining people. And so, what does this abuse look like? Well, the first and most common is a lack of work-life separation. Wave your hands, you know, you can do it in the chat or you can just do silent amens, whichever one. If you've ever heard and or said one or more of the following: I usually work through lunch, work late, I'm addicted to checking my email, I check and answer it all the time, I feel guilty whenever I take sick and or vacation days. This, of course, has been made worse with the pandemic due to blurred contexts. When your work is your home and your home is your work, it is even harder to create those boundaries between work and life. So, how else does vocational awe get weaponized in the workplace? Job creep. When those other duties as assigned become a regular part of your day-to-day responsibilities. It started off with at least things that were tangential to libraries, whether it be dabbling in early education, literacy, other types of literacy. But now these other duties as assigned have become farther and farther away from the original goals of what libraries were. Whether we're now asked to be social workers, EMTs, therapists, accountants. I know that tax day was just recently. We as library workers are asked to do more and more things with less and less time, less resources, less support. Libraries, in many cases, have become the catch-all for the underfunded or unfunded social services in the community. And of course, this has been made worse by the pandemic. We're now 15 months into a crisis that hasn't been seen in over a century. And librarians and library workers have been asked to do anything and everything. In fact, I would like everyone to take a moment and think about all the library practices and expectations that have occurred since last March. Think about when, if ever, your library shut down. Think about who is able to work from home and who isn't. Think about the likely uneven expectations of labor when it comes to enforcing things like mask rules. Think about the vaccine rollout and if the library workers where you were even part of the essential workers 1B rollout where you were. I'll give everyone a moment to just reflect on this past 15 months. Thank you. And so, in summary, let's think about our current normal. Exploitation. Exploitation of passion, exploitation of labor, taking those who believe that they have a calling to do this work. Taking those who may not have as much of whatever metric of success that we're basing library idealism on, that going above and beyond, thinking about our library heroes, those who literally have put their lives on the line, who have potentially gone to jail for it, who have paved the way in all of these different ways, and those who haven't. Regardless of how much you love your job, you love libraries, you go above and beyond, the exploitation is the same. The abuse is the same. When I first started talking about vocational awe, it was in the context of giving Narcan to patrons. The idea that we are now being asked to save lives without any institutional support, without any asks on our part, right? Just another other duty as assigned that could potentially become our new normal. And I said, if we're asked to save lives, the other extreme is to be asked to give our lives. And it was seen as a completely out of this world suggestion. I didn't want to be right with this pandemic. I didn't want the idea that it is normal to work when there are ecological disasters, as in the case of the California workers during the wildfires, where many libraries stayed open even though the state of California shut down due to air quality. I didn't want to be right to have people, for example, in Houston Public Library, where multiple people were diagnosed with COVID, and still the message from administration was you have to take your own sick or vacation days. Otherwise, you have to still come in and work with those who have COVID-19. Or here in my new city of Chicago, where it took multiple ProPublica articles talking about Chicago Public Library for the library to finally close or cut back hours. These past 15 months have shown that death, unfortunately, is not a completely out of the box radical example, but in many cases has become a current normal. That the public good, the ideals of the library, is more important than the health and wellness of our workers, of our very own lives. Many futurists, when they talk about the future of libraries, they talk about technologies, they talk about gig workers and disruption and Silicon Valley type conversation. That is not what I will be talking about today. To me, the future of libraries is vitally important. The way that we think about libraries in a post-COVID world, because we're not there yet, despite our library organizations, our communities pushing for us to go back to normal. There is no going back. There's only going forward. And so, what comes next? What is the future of libraries? So, I wanted to put this quote in because I think it's really important. It can be very hard to think about change in any real way. We've seen over and over again how our own organizations, how our own communities don't care about our wellness, don't care about our health. And so it can seem like, well, nothing will change, so why bother? And so I want us to remember and take this quote to heart. You have to act as if it were possible to radically transform the world, and you have to do it all the time. Think about some of the perks, wrong word, not even perks, some of the rights that we have today. The 40-hour work week, the idea of libraries as it is, right? These are radical socialist concepts that people today wouldn't even think it could happen, right? Didn't even think it could be possible. We, as this past summer has shown, there are definite racial reckonings to be had throughout America. But in many ways, we still have come a very long way. The fact that I am here, a Black, queer, disabled woman, talking to you as an expert shows just how far we've come. People climbed out of their wheelchairs onto the steps of the Capitol, to get us the ADA privileges that we have today. It can really, and I know, trust me, I know, it can seem like change is impossible, but it isn't. We have to keep working, we have to keep doing it all the time. And so, how do we start to radically transform the world? We start by setting boundaries for ourselves and for our friends and coworkers. As important as those job duties might seem, they can wait. Setting aside time for your life, your loved ones, your hobbies, whatever it is vitally important. I always like to say there's no such thing as a library emergency. We're not actually EMTs. We're not actually lawyers or whatever the community is trying to make us into. That email can wait until Monday morning. That email can wait until the next day. Unless the library is on fire or flooding, there is nothing that is so time sensitive that it can't wait a little bit. And if the library is flooding and or on fire, I would hope they wouldn't be calling you, but the actual fire department, or like I don't understand how me as a reference librarian or me as an instructor is somehow going to put out a fire, right? Like, please call 911, right? These emergency services are there for a reason. And just like how we as a field, we get offended when people stick volunteers into a library space and just say, go, you can read, so therefore you could be a librarian. We shouldn't be trying to take over all of these other professional services in our communities just because they're underfunded or unfunded. Our lives are our own, and our institutions they will replace us in a minute. They, if we die, whether it's to COVID or cancer or whatever it might be, they'll, write a nice little note saying they were dedicated, and then they'll open up your job, or they'll pass your responsibilities on to your other workers. So setting those boundaries are important, not just for your mental health, but for your physical health as well. But I know it can be hard to set and stick to something new without help. And so working collectively is just as important as setting boundaries. Whether you're in a unionized place or not, organizing with your coworkers to set and maintain a life outside of work is important. That way, upper management or administration or whatever it might be, they can't say, oh, well, Fabazi answers her emails at 2 a.m., so why don't you? Working collectively gives you as the workers power. And for the administrators out there, it also helps make your library a healthier and more cohesive organization, which improves creativity, it improves morale, it improves productivity. Setting boundaries, working collectively, seeing the workers as a unit, all of these things can help show that while libraries are important and vitally so, they're not the only part of your life. You don't have to be a union to act like one. And so I think it's important to try and remember to say these things to yourselves. Even if you have to write them down on a post-it, stick them on your computer, write them in your journal. I'll read this out loud, and in your various homes and workplaces, read along with me. Say it along with me. I love myself too much to accept a lack of work-life balance. I love myself too much to allow my job to become my whole identity. I love myself too much to tolerate job creep. I love myself too much to witness inequality and or unfair practices and do nothing. The more you say these things, the more it'll feel true. It may not feel true the first time or the second time or even the fifth or 10th time you say it, but soon enough it will. And it's important that it does. I'll leave us with this quote that I try and put in every presentation that I do. Caring for myself is not self-indulgence. It is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. Our culture, our workplaces, librarianship in general, it does not reward caring for yourself. The whole idea of vocational awe is that we should all be those library heroes I mentioned earlier, putting our lives and selves on the line for our communities every day, going above and beyond every day. And so it truly is a radical self act. It truly is an act of political warfare to care for yourself. And not just in the I like to do yoga and take a walk on my lunch break way. To care for yourself, to set those boundaries, to love yourself so much that you advocate for yourselves, for your colleagues, for your communities, to take that step back, to remember that the personal is political and the political is personal. We we can only live one life. We only are here for the time allotted to us. And our institutions, as it is now, they're not built to care for us in that way. And so it's up to us, it's up to all of us to care for ourselves, to love ourselves in a way that is meaningful, in a way that shows that our self preservation is just as important as the public good. Our self love and self care is just as important as championing truth and free speech, as being open and welcome to our communities. I'll say this quote one last time before I take questions. Caring for myself is not self indulgence, it is self preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. The future of libraries may be whatever Silicon Valley tries to think up in terms of disruption or whatever the terms may be. But for me, my future of libraries, the future of libraries that I think is most beneficial to all of us, is to remember that we are humans too. The library is not synonymous with the librarian. The library is not synonymous with the library worker. The library does not do good work. It's the library workers who do good work. And that may be in a library building, or it may be in our various homes, while as we try and remember to take care of ourselves. Because taking care of ourselves also takes care of our communities. Thank you. That's all I have, so I will take questions now.
Thank you so much, Fabazi. While we're waiting for some questions to come in through either the chat or the Q&A, we did have one question come in through our Discord server. That if anyone caught the name of the scholar that you referenced who does work on the concept of do what you love, if you could repeat that name.
Yes, and I'll put it in the chat as well.
Great.
So she does, and I'll just put, and
Thank you.
Davis does low morale experiences. So these are the 3 people that I would definitely look up afterward.
Okay, we do have a question. Oh, we have a couple questions in the Q&A here. I can read them if you'd like, or
Yes, that'd be great.
sure. Okay. So amen, 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 and thank you. Do you have any advice on how to set boundaries and work collectively when one works in a very large institution with a number of highly privileged people who will not work collectively because the institution, inadvertently or not, actively rewards them for prioritizing their individual career progression?
Yeah, so it can definitely be hard when certain people either are, as you said, rewarded for having unhealthy boundaries, or they have drunkenly delayed. And I mean that like in the thing that it's intended, right? Where it has become a cult-like atmosphere. And so I would say that starting small is always important. You're not going to get the whole organization at once. You may not get the whole organization at all. But, if you can get one person on your side, maybe you can get 2. If you can get 2 people on your side, maybe you can get 3. I think that you'll see that oftentimes those people that are going above and beyond are in fact miserable. And while at first they may lash out at the idea that they don't have to do this because they put so much of their own self-worth, their own identity into it, we all are looking for permission to have work-life separation, to have that work-life balance. And so in terms of setting boundaries, I always like to use the email as a big one. Charlotte Rowe, my professional colleague and friend, she puts in her email signature, does not respond on nights and weekends. Or if you are a public librarian and therefore you do sometimes work on weekends or nights, you can say something like, my workday may not be your workday. Please, understand that I will only respond during my own workday. So that again gets to the point, right, where whatever it is, it can wait until my workday. It does not have to happen right here, right now. And so, again, it might seem like it's taking forever. Unfortunately, progress does not work quickly, but that is a way to start setting those boundaries.
Okay, we have a few more questions here. Any advice on how to get library admin to stop sending emails at 2 a.m.?
Well, I don't think you can necessarily stop them from sending it at 2 a.m. But again, if you start setting that precedent, saying that you will not respond Like they can send it at 2 a.m. as much as they want, but you will only ever respond during work hours, then that will again set that boundary saying that, your emergency does not constitute my own. Um, and I know that it can be scarier because of that power dynamic there. But again, that's why I always try and connect setting boundaries with working collectively so that there is no, a nail that can get hammered down. If you all are deciding not to answer at 2:05 a.m., then the administrator or manager or whomever will they will understand that that boundary is there. Okay.
I see some more questions here. Other than sharing this recording with my higher ups and administration, how can I get them to listen? Various staff have had retaliatory experiences when trying to set boundaries during the pandemic.
Yeah. I think that just like how and I wish, um, I did take a management class during my MLIS, but it was very much geared towards managing like collections, managing different communities. We don't really talk about, oftentimes, as we're learning how to be a good librarian, a good library worker, we talk about meeting students where they are or meeting patrons where they are, right? And so the idea is to take the context that they understand and use whatever that context is to build in new knowledge, right? Whether it be sports or music, um, using those contexts to connect to this new knowledge helps them understand it. It's the same sort of idea when we're talking with administrators. Administrators in management oftentimes need to sell the value of the library to even higher stakeholders. Their job is to look at the big picture and say the library helps the community in this way. The library is great because this. And so if we know that about managers, we know that about administrators, that they always sort of need this narrative to show that libraries are good for the community in some way. That is the trying to use that context is how you can help your own advocacy. So for example, if let's say it's something like, oh, why are you taking so many vacation days? Why are you taking so many sick days? Whatever it might be, saying something like, um, studies show that the worker who actually has higher levels of mental and physical health end up being X% more productive in the workplace because of this. Or something like when organizations have higher flexibility when it comes to working from home or whatever the case may be, it boosts morale within the organization, which in turn boosts productivity towards the whatever tasks or strategic plan that we are trying to accomplish. Think in the most sort of neoliberal terms, right? A happy worker is going to be a lot more effective than a worker who's tired, than a worker who's stressed out, than a worker who's sick. And so using that sort of language can help get the advocacy that you are looking for, but in a way that makes sense to an administrator. So that's what my advice would be there.
Thank you. And you might have answered some of this question. Just going down the list, we have 5 open questions right now. Thoughts on administration that talks the talk but doesn't walk the walk?
Yeah, it can, again, definitely be hard. Administration understands the language, but doesn't necessarily actually perform what they're saying. Unfortunately, people are people. So at a certain point, you can only do so much. But I would definitely try to, again, make sure to put it in that sort of neoliberal context first and see if that works. And if not, um, talking to other library workers who have similar managers, because I only know so much of the context, right, from what you are saying. But speaking to other people, whether it be online, in your community, if it's a system, in your system, and sharing those frustrations can, one, help with having that sort of reality check, right? It's like, especially if you're being gaslit, to see that no, like they are in fact being hypocrites in this way, and having those people who understand more of the context can also help with creating more targeted approaches to fighting back and advocating for yourself in whatever manner is most helpful to you.
Thank you. Next question is, many academic libraries are preparing to return to in-person work. I feel that this is a good opportunity to reset our libraries and make them better places to work, but many are excited to return to normal. Do you have any advice on how to frame these discussions or advocate for change? And I am going to model setting good boundaries and take a quick break. So if I am silent for a long time, apologies. And somebody else in the panelists, please do moderate this Q&A for a moment.
Okay, so yes, that push to go back to normal, it is definitely a hard obstacle to overcome. And so I would say that um, creating that narrative, honestly, you'd be surprised at just how effective creating a narrative can be in terms of advocating for yourselves and others. So if the narrative that you're trying to create is, hey, things like working from home has been really great for me. Look at all of these cool programs that we've been able to do during this time that we didn't even think about during the pre-pandemic. Just like sort of writing it all out, um, thinking about what the most compelling arguments are, and adding in the sort of anecdata that you've seen, right? Whether it's been from your own work, from testimonials from the patrons, and sort of using that to bring to the group and say, hey, look at what the patrons have been saying about this or that, or hey, look at how much more productive or successful these outcomes have been since doing this pivot during the pandemic. I know that we want to, forget everything that's happened in the past 15 months, but these are actually some like really amazing things that we've done, that hopefully we can continue to bring forward as we go back to normal, quote unquote. We've seen that we've been doing this for like 25 years, and because of this pandemic, we have stopped. And actually, look, like our patrons seem to be okay without this service, or look at how vital this service has been. And we didn't even know until this pandemic forced us to, you know, do this pivot. These are some great things that we can bring back with us, as we get back to normal, that our stakeholders will really like, our communities will really enjoy. And hopefully, if by like literally writing it out, thinking about the arguments, whatever it might be, and sharing it with the group, that is a great way to, again, frame it so that it's not necessarily seen as like a selfish ask, but like, oh, I'm being like such a great librarian, I'm thinking about like the community and our stakeholders and blah blah blah. So hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you. And I'm seeing that, yeah, things are getting upvoted. So I'm gonna, yeah, just kind of go through the questions and comments that have gotten upvoted. There are also cases of colleagues who push and push or send a flurry of emails that make you feel like their issue is urgent when all they are doing is thinking out loud. Hard sometimes to understand that it's just this person's style is, and remember to mark urgency when truly urgent. And if you have any comments on uh, interacting with colleagues that do this.
Yeah, I call them like the stream of consciousness people. Um, Whether that's rude or not is up to you, but that's sort of how I categorize them in my head. But like the people who, that's as you said, it's not necessarily urgent, but because they're thinking about it right now, it is like it seems incredibly urgent. But as you have already sort of done some of the work to notice that it is not, it is just them sort of doing that stream of consciousness. It's not necessarily something that they are, maybe they don't mean for it to come off as urgent as it is. But what you can do, this is sort of more of an interpersonal situation. So a little bit hard to give advice without more context, but I would suggest maybe having like a one-on-one conversation with the person, saying like, hey, when you do this, it affects me in this way. I'm sure you didn't mean it, and I'm sure it wasn't your intent, but I just wanted to let you know, um, that may or may not change the behavior, but what it will do is it will create transparency. I always find that the more transparency there is, the less likely that those sort of interpersonal problems will happen, because what you've done is you've created shared expectations, right? You're saying, when you do this, this is how I translate it. And, you may have to say it more than once, but it'll help the other, because the other person may not even know that this is what they are sort of engendering in you with all of these sort of back to back emails. It could just be their way of communicating. And so having that conversation um, creates that transparency and also creates a foundation for further interactions. So, like, should this continue to occur after you have done these sort of multiple mini interventions, then perhaps it's something that requires a larger intervention, whether it's going to a supervisor, right? Whether it is having some sort of mediation. I don't necessarily know what the response will be, but I think creating that sort of like how I did with this presentation, right, where I started off with sort of ground rules and shared expectations for what I wanted this presentation to go like, right? Creating those shared goals, those shared understandings can really help reduce um, problems like that are usually caused by muddled expectations like that.
Thank you. We are almost at time, and we have about 3 questions left. We do have a 30-minute break up next, so we could run over if you were willing, although I also understand, we are at time. Do you have a preference?
Well, I think that, as much as I would love to continue talking, I should probably listen to my own advice and, respect the time of everyone here. It has been a long conference. Those breaks can definitely help in terms of resetting. It is lunchtime as well. So, you know, um, that's why I do always say you can reach me on Twitter or you can email me. Like, please feel free, especially if we don't get a question, and I will do my best to answer it.
Right. Thank you so much for your time today and leaving us with so much to think about. I'm going to bring it over to Ted, who's going to conclude the session for us.
Thank you very much, Betsy. Thank you so much, Fabazi. That was brilliant. Lots to think about. So thank you very much for sharing your time and thoughts with us today. And thank you everyone for attending this fascinating and thought-provoking presentation. The session recording will be posted on our YouTube channel for registered attendees. And please feel free to continue the conversations on the Vision Session channel of our conference Discord server. That will be available through the end of the month, so plenty of time to keep this going. But once again, just thank you for very, very fascinating presentations. Greatly appreciated.